All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience as I was experimenting with volume, and clearly that did not work out. So I appreciate your patience in helping me out with the video. So this morning, today we will be going over heat illness prevention. And so this is a part of AgSafe's monthly free webinar series where we discuss different health and safety topics throughout the year. So we will be in the same place, same time next month on July 13th, 8:30 Pacific, 11:30 Eastern time. And honestly, I'm not sure what the topic is next month, but I'll be sure to let you know in a follow-up email. So today we are going to be talking about heat illness prevention. So my name is Natalie Gupton. I am the Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for AgSafe. As most of you know, AgSafe is located in Modesto, California, where we're headquartered, but I am all the way across the United States in Louisville, Kentucky. You can reach me with information on the screen. Be sure to check out our website. We're excited. We're getting a new website really soon, so watch out for that. But also a great place to get more information, resources, and find out any new trainings that may be coming up in person and online. Also, lots of information available on social media at AgSafe Online. There we also provide updates, compliance information, as well as upcoming training. So encourage you to check that out. To check out our disclaimer, I'll give you just a moment to read that, and then we'll dive into today's content. Okay, so thank you for reviewing that. So just as a friendly reminder, we are talking about heat illness prevention, and we're looking at this from a federal perspective. So I know a lot of you are residing in California, but our monthly topics are from the federal perspective. So today, in regards to heat illness prevention, we're going to look at regulations, employer responsibilities, heat exposure on the job, signs and symptoms, what to do in emergency, as well as some training and resources. So first, again, we are looking at this from the federal perspective, so be sure to check out your local and state standards, as they may be different, especially those of you that are in California. I'll briefly touch on yours, but from the federal perspective, heat illness prevention falls under the general duty clause. As with most standards or regulations within agriculture in other states, you are going to fall under the general duty clause. And so as a reminder, this is where OSHA requires employers to provide their employees with a place of employment that is free from recognizable hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious harm to employees. And so heat illness prevention falls under this clause. And so if you have any incidents on your operation or on your farm and you don't have a specific standard to heat illness prevention, you can be cited under the general duty clause. And just As a reminder for our friends in California, you do have a very specific standard that you must have to abide by. But I wanted to be sure to include it because if you're not in California, this is actually something that you can look at as a best practice. If you do have an incident and you have all these things in place and you are following these procedures, you may not be held liable just because you have demonstrated diligence and had a plan in place. However, if you are in California, you are required to have a written prevention plan. And in this plan, it must include the following. Excuse me. Procedures for providing sufficient water, procedures for providing access to shade, high heat procedures, emergency response procedures, and acclimatization methods and procedures. And so in California, again, you must have this written both in English and that language understood by most employees. However, looking at, our nation as a whole, again, these are best practices. If you have these things written down and have trained your employees on these procedures, you are in a very good place. Now, we're not going to get into the specifics of each one for those of you that are in California, but know that you have to have very specific procedures that fall under each of these categories to be in compliance. Next, again, under that general duty clause we're talking about, it is employer's responsibility to protect your workers. Whether you have one employee or you have hundreds to thousands of employees, you as the employer, the person in charge, you're responsible to keep those workers safe. And heat illness prevention is fairly straightforward if you are paying attention. You simply just have to provide workers with water, rest, and shade, and making sure that they're taking advantage of those. Again, it is a line, like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink situation, but talking about it, talking about the importance of consuming water, talking about taking some brief rest and shade breaks, encourage them to do so. And again, emphasizing why it's important is one way to get them to take advantage of that. Additionally, I know depending on what state you're in, California, we're required to provide paid rest breaks and shade breaks, especially in high heat. Other states, you're not. However, that is a great way to encourage your employees to take care of themselves, that you'll give them 5-10 minutes on the clock where they can sit down, cool off, and take care of themselves. And that is an excellent way that you're ensuring that workers are taking care of themselves when they're in high temperatures. Next, allow new or returning workers to gradually increase their workloads and take more frequent breaks as they acclimatize or build a tolerance for working in the heat. Now, realize, depending on where you are and what part of the country you are in, heat and humidity are very different. Here in Kentucky, when you get in the heart of summer, humidity is crazy. And the further you move south on the eastern side of the country, the humidity gets insane. We joke that it's called air that you can wear. It can be smothering, especially if you're not used to humidity. If you have a worker that's used to high temperatures but not humidity, it can be very troublesome. So giving them the opportunity to acclimatize and get used to that new environment is important. Conversely, if you're getting somebody from the east side of the country and coming to dry heat, it may affect them differently. So again, giving them the opportunity to build that tolerance is very important for workers to be productive, to recognize how their bodies react into that new environment, and to be able to, again, just have that tolerance for that heat so they can be productive for you. Next, you want to plan for emergencies and train workers on prevention. And so we'll talk about signs of illness in just a moment, but training, especially your supervisors and those that are in charge, to be able to identify what these signs and symptoms look like, because that is one of the key actions that you can do for making the situation worse, is to have those first aid actions ready and available when a heat illness is identified, where you're seeing those precursor symptoms, so you can address it very quickly before the illness accelerates and becomes more of a life-threatening situation. So on this slide, I was sharing a video from from federal OSHA, talking about heat illness prevention and the importance of it on the job. I'll be sure to send this link to you, since we could not get our audio to work properly. It's very short. It's only, I believe, 1.5 minutes. So an opportunity that you can share with employees, share with supervisors for your operation. Again, just the more you talk about heat illness and signs and symptoms, that your employees will be aware of it and hopefully take action when necessary. So talking about the heat exposure on the job, again, many different situations. In farming operations, depending how large you are or how small you are and how many employees, there's so many different types of jobs that you can find a farm worker doing, from welding, working on farm equipment, to the actual field labor, all of which you're exposing those individuals to heat in some form of fashion, especially when you are in those high summer temperatures. If you do have fluctuation in temperatures in your region. Outdoor operations conducted in hot weather and direct sun, specifically, talking about our farm work, but not just unique to agriculture. We see it in construction, oil, gas, landscaping, so on and so forth. But just being aware of those hazards and the increased risk of heat and illness to those workers. Every year, thousands of workers become sick from occupational heat exposure, and can lead to death if not taken care of properly and addressed very quickly. So when you're working in a hot environment, the body must get rid of excess heat to maintain a stable internal temperature. And it does this mainly through circulating blood to the skin and through sweating. So when the air temperature is close to or warmer than your normal body temperature, cooling of the body becomes very difficult, and the blood circulated to the skin cannot lose its heat. And then sweating becomes the main way the body can cool off. However, sweating is effective only if the humidity level is low enough to allow for evaporation. So again, there I'm talking about humidity again. So depending on where you're located, paying very close attention to humidity levels will also give you an idea of the potential risks that your workers may be exposed to on a particular day. So if your body can't get rid of that excess heat, especially through sweating, it can store it. And when this happens, the body's core temperature rises and your heart rate increases, and your body continues to store that heat, and you begin to lose concentration, have difficulty focusing on a task. You might become irritable and sick, and you lose your desire to drink. And so the next stage is most often fainting, even death, if the person is not cooled down. So those are some signs and symptoms. And again, I'll get into that a little bit more. And that excess exposure to heat can cause a range of heat illnesses. So it's almost a progressive model in sense, from heat rash to heat cramps, heat exhaustion to heat stroke. And so then when you're at that final stage of heat stroke, it can result in death and requires immediate medical attention. So here are the 4 main heat illnesses that you need to be aware of. Again, talking that this is somewhat of a progressive model. You may not be able to observe the heat stroke or the heat rash or heat cramps because that is on the lower end. But if you do, be aware that these can be precursors to the other 2. And again, the highest risk of death is there at heat stroke. Heat stroke, it happens when the body becomes unable to regulate its core temperature. So we just talked about how that occurs. But signs include confusion, loss of consciousness, and seizures. So it's very obvious when a person gets to this state, as it can be very serious. Heat exhaustion is a step down from that. And this is just the body's response to loss of water and salt from heavy sweating. And again, this is the headache, nausea, dizziness, weakness, irritability, thirst, and heavy sweating. So when you are in a hot environment, sometimes it's hard to really recognize if somebody else is experiencing these symptoms. So really talking through and training employees what these signs and symptoms are so that they can speak up. Though you are responsible as an employer, you really have to stress to your employees that they're their first line of defense, because again, you can't always observe if somebody is nauseated or have a headache. And talking through why it's important that they recognize when they are experiencing these symptoms, what it can lead to. So again, having proper training with your employees on heat illness will be a great prevention method. And then on that lower level, again, we're talking about the heat cramps and heat rash. And when they experience these, encourage them to take a step back, drink some water, take some rest in shade. And again, to encourage employees to do this is to allow them to do this paid. If you're not going to pay them for taking a break, they're more than likely not going to take one until they reach some emergency levels. So again, just providing them the opportunity that they can just take a quick break and cool off for just a moment will be a great prevention method. So this is a great graphic to reference. Again, lots of resources on the internet and lots of information from OSHA on heat illness prevention. But addressing the symptoms or identifying symptoms and then having first aid available. And again, down here at the bottom, you're looking at those 2 lower level illnesses, the heat rash and heat cramps, and even working its way into heat exhaustion. Most often, you're just giving them the opportunity to rest and cool down. It's the easiest thing that you can do for first aid. Allowing them to with a heat rash, the treatment here, it says try to work in cooler, less humid environment when possible and keep the affected area dry. So this occurs with the symptoms. It's clusters and red bumps on the skin, often appears on neck or upper chest, folds of skin. And then looking at heat cramps, these are muscle spasms, pain, usually in the abdomen, arms, and legs. And so for the first aid for that is have the worker rest in shady, cool areas. Workers should drink water or other cool beverages. Often you want to avoid extremely cool, extremely cold beverages, as this can send the body into shock. So cool, temperate temperatures, but not icy cold, because it can shock the body. Wait a few hours before allowing worker to return to strenuous work. Have workers seek medical attention if work doesn't, or if the cramps don't go away. Now, looking at the heat exhaustion, some of those symptoms are cool, moist skin, heavy sweating, headache, nausea, vomiting, dizziness, lightheadedness, weakness, thirst, irritability, and a fast heartbeat. And so first aid for this is to have the worker sit down in a cool, shady area. You can see that is the first thing to do in with each of these illnesses. Give the worker plenty of water or other cool beverages to drink. Cool worker with cold compresses or ice packs. These days with first aid kits, they make some cool ice packs available where they don't have to be cold or contained in a refrigerator or a cooler. They're chemical ice packs in which you break them kind of like a glow stick, and then they start cooling. And so those are a great thing to have in your first aid kit. Next, if those symptoms continue to be present and the person still is not improving, you may need to take that person to a clinic or emergency room for evaluation. And again, they probably need a little bit of extra rest if those symptoms do not subside fairly quickly, as they may have reached a point where they need much more rest than just a few minutes in the shade. And then finally, with that heat stroke, we talked about the seriousness of this. But again, this person, you may need to loosen up their clothes, maybe even removing an outer layer. You to fan the worker, use those cold ice packs, putting that in their armpits or groin area. Could wet the worker with cool water with the ice packs and cold compresses if available. Provide fluids, again, not ice cold, because that will send the body into shock. And then stay with the worker until help arrives. So again, being aware of these signs and symptoms and how they can progress quickly if not addressed. And again, the graphic on the right is just a very straightforward, simple graphic. Potentially having some posters available in common work areas. And again, just talking about heat illness with your workers will be a great prevention method. And distressing training is key. Lots of resources available online for free. OSHA, through OSHA, they have a huge campaign, the Water Rest Shade campaign. Talking about that in the video that I wanted to share with you. But these links are available to get those resources. Again, tons of information out there through OSHA, available free of charge. So with that, I want to open up to any questions from the group. Again, we only had a short time together, but want to encourage you to check out your local and state standards, as they do vary from state to state, especially those of you that are in California. You have much more strict standards and very specific things that you need to follow. So we had a question that says, are there any new laws in California that we need to implement? So Marvin, as of right now, I don't think there has been any new heat illness prevention laws in the past couple years. I know there's the indoor heat um, standard that has been in discussion, but it has not become official as of yet. But that is one thing to keep an eye out for, that indoor heat standard is in the wings, but again, not official as of yet. We also had a question, received the slides after the training. Yes, I will give you a copy of the slides. I will provide links to you as well as a copy of the recording of today's session. We had a question. It says, is nausea a symptom of heat stroke? And so I will go back to our handy dandy chart. And so based on the information on the screen, nausea actually starts more with the heat exhaustion and would be a precursor to heat stroke. So they are experiencing nausea, they're probably still more in that heat exhaustion realm. But if not addressed properly, then it could progress into heat stroke. But when you're in the stroke, you're more into the confusion, the fainting, seizures, excessive sweating. So you're a little bit more disoriented when you're in that stroke standpoint. Sometimes could be even unconscious at that point if you have fainted. Excellent. So I will hang out for just a moment more. If anybody has any other questions, just type them in the chat box. But with that, I hope you have a wonderful and safe day.